Welcome to the Thrive podcast with the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church.
How does your faith kind of play into it, or does it play into it?
What can be done about it? When I say the church, I'm talking about evangelical white Christians and the black folk who attend their churches.
Hello, welcome to the Thrive podcast with the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. I'm Fred Jeff Smith, pastor of Shiloh, and I'm very happy that you are either viewing this on YouTube or Facebook, or you're listening to us on iTunes, Spotify, or Amazon Prime. As always, we invite your comments and your feedback on the podcast, how we can make it better. You can reach me at fredjeffsmith@gmail.com, fredjeffsmith@gmail.com. And thank you again for being a viewer and a listener. I'm gratified today to have two very significant people in Louisiana politics sitting with me today. I have Mrs. Ashley Kennedy Shelton, who is the Executive Director of the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice, and this is your second time being with us. And I have Mr. Edmond Jordan, who is the Chairman of the Louisiana Legislative Black Caucus. This is your first time with us, Mr. Jordan. Thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us today. The main topic is the supposed special session that's coming up on the 23rd of October. But before we get into that, Mr. Jordan, you're an attorney. How did you make the decision to make the leap from practicing law to entering into politics? Or was that always a part of the
I still practice
plan?
law, so let me be clear. I'm still a practicing attorney, but you know what? Really, I never really had a desire to necessarily get into politics as a kid. It wasn't one of my dreams or anything like that. But in college, unbeknownst to me, I guess sometimes people see something in you that you don't see in yourself. I had a professor of mine that was somewhat of a mentor, and he's like, you know what, I think you're going to be a lawyer, and I think you're going to be in politics. Now, that's interesting. It was strange to me because I'm a pre-med biology and chemistry major. That's my undergrad degree. Okay. So that I really didn't have a desire.
So you were one of the smart kids in class.
Let me say that I didn't have a desire to go to law school or to get into politics, to be very frank with you. And how I got to law school is a different story that we could share at another time. But one of my first jobs coming out of law school was working for the Public Service Commission. Mm-hmm. And when I got there, really it was to see the power of an agency that sort of flies under the radar. Mm-hmm. I mean, you've got 5 commissioners. At one time, when it first started, there was only 3 commissioners, so each commissioner represented a third of the state. When I got there, 1/5 of the state. And a very powerful agency that very few people know about. And so just watching and observing from that perspective gave me, if nothing else, it gave me the thought and certainly the confidence. I think, I always thought that probably I could do something like that. But then look, and that's not a slight on the commissioners we had. We had some very good commissioners, but they empowered us to make recommendations and to follow those. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I was tasked with when I was there was to start the Do Not Call program. I'm sure, if you're older, you probably remember that. If you're younger, you're probably trying to figure out what am I talking about. But that was to prevent the spam calls from coming to your home or to your cell phone. So I started up that program for the commission and ran it for its first 2 years. Mm-hmm. And from that perspective, I really said, look, I testifying in front of the commission and what have you, I said, look, I could do this. So that's what really planted the seed and gave me the idea to do it. And then, fortunately, in 2016, I was elected by the people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that it's the right decision that was made for you to go into this direction as opposed to pre-med?
You know what? Let's say it like this. I felt like I am where I need to be when I need to be there. Mm-hmm. So I do think I do have enough faith in God's plan to know that he has some ideas bigger than me. I can't always figure it out. Some days I'm still trying to figure out what exactly does he have in store. But yeah, I have no doubt this is where I was supposed to be. So I don't look back or have any regrets or anything like that, because if I got into the story of how I actually got into law school, you would understand more. But yeah, this is part of my calling, at least for this season.
Ashley, before we talk about the special session, can we talk about troops in East Baton Rouge Parish? Because Power Coalition works statewide. The mayor-president warmed to the idea of troops being brought into Louisiana. That came from the governor. I'm opposed to it. Prophetic Voices is opposed to it.
Me as well.
But what's your sense of where that is at this point? Because you have contacts throughout the state.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is going to happen, unfortunately. I think that the biggest concentration will probably be in New Orleans, more so than Baton Rouge. But again, Baton Rouge is still on the table. I think it depends on how our leaders respond. I think it depends on how community responds. And so we've certainly been talking to folks on the ground, talking to community leaders. And, and I think that what folks, there's so much dissonance between like what's happening on the ground in communities and then what people think the solution is. And so, we were teasing. We were like, well, can the National Guard fix the potholes and can they clean the catch basins so the streets don't flood? And can they, there's so much.
Well, it's funny you say that, because the mayor-president was talking about using them to pick up trash in East Baton Rouge Parish, which I don't think is what the governor had in mind when he wrote the letter asking them to come in. But I just think it's an insult
it is
to
absolutely.
the state.
No, it's an insult.
To make this suggestion.
Well, and also too, like I think about the national. They're pulling these folks from their jobs to come and and occupy our cities. And really, again, we don't want to talk about how do we truly address these issues of crime. That again, crime has been considerably going down in communities across this country.
Yes.
Louisiana included, in many ways. And so it's just like, again, like they don't have arresting power. So again, it's a question of like, well, what are they really here to do? And I think it's also too absurd to think that the answer to changing your community comes from outside of your community. It absolutely comes from the inside, and we have to think about how do we work with community to actually find the solution, and then also too, how do we move policy that supports the community? We want to talk about the National Guard. Let's talk about healthcare. Let's talk about living wages. Let's talk about economic opportunity. None of those are the things. Let's talk about early childhood education. Those are the things that hold the community together and repair the things that create a never-ending cycle of poverty and criminalization. But we don't want to talk about that. We just want to have the use of force or the scene and the presence of these folks that are pretty much, like I said, it just feels like an occupation. Yeah. And I think that is a lot of people have been talking about how this feels a lot like after Reconstruction, right? Like this sense that there's a presence in all of these communities across the country. Strangely enough, all of them majority African American, where these occupations are happening. And I just tell folks, I said, well, what you should really be afraid of is that it actually feels more like a recolonization, and we need to think about that. And and I always talk about Puerto Rico has always been a colony and treated like a colony in this country, and and that our states, both individually and all together, should be considering like what does it actually mean for us all to become and to be treated like colonies. And I think that that's what it feels like is upon us. And I think that people like the feeling or like the way it sounds or whatever it is, but you have to think about your everyday life and everyday traffic and everyday moving around. And what is it for these folks to do? Where are they going to be when crime is actually happening? Where, you know, like what communities are they focusing on? And then too, and that community protects community too. So like as this outside force, you know, I just think that there's so many other ways to solve this problem, so many cheaper ways that we could be spending money to make our communities whole. And unfortunately, we want to have a visual. And we want to have, you know, this occupation, this feeling that, you know, we're being watched, this feeling that we're not, that actually, you know, we're not safe. And maybe it's not because we have crime, but it's because we're occupied.
Right. Mr. Jordan, I'm going to get to what you all came here to talk about, but
that's all right.
The question came to me, what's your attitude about deconsolidation of East Baton Rouge Parish? You live in this community, you work in this community, and more and more I'm hearing, it used to be a whisper, and it's getting louder and louder, that consolidated form of government is not working for East Baton Rouge Parish as it once did.
You know,
what's your belief about that?
So, well, that's interesting. That wasn't the question I thought you were going to ask me. But I was, just for the record, I'm against the National Guard as well. But National Guard coming into our city. Let me, because somebody will clip that and say I'm against the National Guard. I'm against the National Guard coming in and occupying these cities. So let me be clear about that. You know, I've thought about that over the years. And I will tell you, frankly, I go back and forth on that question. You know, it's interesting to me. I will tell you, at one time, I was a strong proponent of deconsolidation. And I thought it might be best because I think Baton Rouge is always curious to me why, if we've got Baker, Central, Zachary, that they've got their own and the communities, and they you know, they've got the right to control their own destination. Excuse me, and do that. Why wouldn't the city of Baton Rouge have that as well? But then, you know, I'm always cautious when folks on the other side start talking about deconsolidation. As if it's a good thing. So I think we need to evaluate it all. When we were the minority in the parish, you know, consolidation was good for them. Now that we're certainly the plurality moving toward the majority of the parish. You know, what does deconsolidation on the parish level look like, and then who gets those parish contracts? You know, I still believe that the city of Baton Rouge should have its own right to self-determination. So I'm not against that. The bigger question to me, though, is deconsolidation the answer, or is it getting a fair representation on the Metro Council where it's 7 African Americans and 5 non-African Americans versus this 7-5 makeup that we have right now. And so as we get closer to that becoming a reality, then you start hearing more from other people that, yeah, well, maybe deconsolidation would be good because maybe they see the writing on the wall that we're moving in that direction. And I think you got to look at just to change it just slightly. If you look at what's happened with the 19 JDC from a legal perspective, you know, of course, when most of the judges were white, everything was fine. There was no need to go and redraw the maps. And then, you know, all of a sudden we have more African American judges now, and we get this bill last session to change the makeup of the 19 JDC. So
Ms. Freiberg.
That's right,
Ms. Freiberg.
So what I'm saying is, while I certainly support the city of Baton Rouge having the right to self-determination, the solution I think we really got to be careful about thinking about. And again, I'm not necessarily opposed to deconsolidation. That may be the answer, but I do think we need to get some bright minds in the rooms and really have that discussion and weigh the pros and the cons of it. Right now, I will tell you, and it's not an either or approach. I think it's both and. I think while we look at that, we still need to be working toward fair maps for the Metro Council that our former Mayor Pro Tem and current Superintendent Lamont Cole filed along with Cleve Dunn and some others. So I think we need to continue that battle. But again, a lot of that is going to be dependent upon what happens in this Calais decision next week, and that'll provide a more definitive roadmap for us.
You're leading me where we need to go. For those who are not familiar with Calais versus Louisiana, Louisiana versus Calais, could you, in a nutshell, either one of you, just explain exactly what this case involves?
Well, so I mean, since Ashley's looking at me, I'll go ahead and take
Well, you're
that.
a lawyer. Like,
I will.
just play one on TV.
So the Calais matter was brought by some plaintiffs, and one of them, including Rolf McAllister, who's known here in Baton Rouge, who basically said that when the legislature, when we created that second minority district, that it was a gerrymandered district, the one that we created for current Congressman Cleo Fields. Now, I want to be very clear because I want your audience to know this. The map that we passed was not the original map supported by the Louisiana Legislative Black Caucus. The map that we proposed was a map, in essence, went from Baton Rouge to Monroe. The map was more compact. And met more of the Gingell's principles, which are some of the legal principles of redistricting. I don't want to get into all of that, but it was the preferred map for us. Now, because of political reasons and the governor wanting to get rid of the district belonging to Garrett Graves and protect Julia Letlow, they decided they wanted to go from Baton Rouge to Shreveport.
Right.
At the end of the day, for us, we said we wanted two minority districts, and that was the fair thing to do. Now, why it wasn't our preference, it wasn't about preferable to us, at the end it gave the result that we desired. So we went along with it. The governor went along with it. In fact, the attorney general went along with it because they didn't want the courts to draw the map. Because if the courts had drawn the map, they probably would have gone with the map that we preferred that went from Baton Rouge to Monroe. That being said, once that map was established, the Calais plaintiffs decided to file suit saying that the map was gerrymandered, was a racial gerrymander. Now, we went to the Western District Court. They didn't file it here in Baton Rouge. And I will tell you the makeup of the judiciary in the Middle District, Federal District Court for the Middle District of Louisiana, is probably slightly more liberal than the Western District.
Right.
All right. And so they decided, and you can file the suit wherever the map is. So since it encompassed part of the Western District, they filed it in the Western District. So Western District decided with the plaintiffs and said that the map was gerrymandered. Now, was interesting in that case, the Attorney General, Liz Murrow, she defended the legislature, which is what we feel is her job to do. She's constitutionally sworn to uphold that because the laws that the legislature passed are presumed to be constitutional until the court says otherwise. And so they said it was a gerrymander. Went to the Supreme Court in March. In March, she defended it and said that SB 8, which was the instrument that created the second district, that it was constitutional, and she defended us there. And so in July, when Judge Kavanaugh asked about this question on Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which was not before the court in those other matters. In fact, the plaintiffs have waived the Section 2 argument there. So the only reason it's before the Supreme Court now is because Judge Kavanaugh has raised this issue of Section 2. And so on August 27th, Liz Murrow, on this same instrument, there's not a separate SB 8, there's not a separate instrument. It's only one law that she's defended twice in federal court. And at the Supreme Court, she's flipped, done a 180-degree turn, and said now she can no longer defend SB 8, and she's saying it's unconstitutional. What really, besides her reasoning behind this, what really offended me in this thing is she filed a supplemental brief for the appellants. The appellants, we are the appellants, the Louisiana legislature. We passed the law. You're supposed to be defending us. So I'm not sure how you can file a brief for us that totally argues against us. So the real question is, when we go to court on Wednesday, who represents the state of Louisiana, who represents the people of Louisiana, when the person that's supposed to be representing us through the legislature has made an argument completely against us.
Ashley?
Yeah, and and I think, even going, like kind of same through line, but I think being more specific about how this played out in real time, right? In real time, this was the governor's map. This wasn't even an agreement of the governor. Like, this was his map. This legislature, without one vote from one person on the Black caucus, or even the Democratic caucus, if I'm not mistaken, they could pass this map without any vote from anybody that wasn't on their side. And so the idea that somehow, like they made a mistake, it was an error in judgment, is wild to me, right? And I think what's even more sad about the moment we find ourselves in, I remind people, because people forget, right? Like, because they think that, we're in this post-racial place because we elected a Black president a little while ago, and then have been dealing with the fallout from that the years. Ever since. But every right I have as a Black woman has been given to me by the federal courts. Every single one. Okay? My same federal courts gave them to my dad and mom, and the same federal courts that gave it to my grandparents. And so the one time that an elected leader that represents me said, let's do the right thing. And let's be clear, under the threat of the federal court. So we're not going to pretend like there wasn't a threat. And as Edmond said, yes, like they knew that the federal court would draw the map if the legislature did not. But the one time they did it, and then they want to take it back and go make a 180-degree turn and say it was a mistake and argue against the residents of this state. And so I think that and the people they actually represent, which are our legislators. And I think that people have to understand the context of this moment. And Edmond and I have been talking a lot about people want this to be about one seat. They want it to be about Cleo. They want it to be about this. It's just like one little fight. And it's like, this is not one little fight.
Not that at all.
The enormity of this is about power at every level of government. Because we
throughout the country. And for all Black and brown people in this country to be able to have rights. Because let's be clear that when African Americans have rights, that it extends and creates opportunity for all communities of color.
Right.
And so this case really will, if decided that Section 2 is not valid, then we are looking at fights. If race cannot be considered, we're looking at fights not only in Congress, where let me remind you, before the Voting Rights Act, we only had 4 minority congressional seats. We currently have just, over 65, 67 minority seats currently. If this passes, we could be looking at a loss of almost half of those seats. And we see the trend in this country is certainly that the powers that be will definitely take us there, right? And so then you think about our state legislatures, then you think about our city councils, you think about our school boards. Right. And so this is the, they want to talk about the big steal. This is the big steal. This is taking away voice and power. And I talk a lot about, this is about citizenship. I mean, so if I don't have representation at any level of government, how am I a citizen?
Here's the thing. This is, and I think this is what people miss in the overall deal. They look at this. This is about one congressional seat in Louisiana. This is really about all elected Black representation in the nation, just guised under the case that involves a Black congressional seat in Louisiana. Because this is really not. At its core, it's really not even about a gerrymandered seat anymore. Right. It started off that way, but this is really about a Section 2. This is about the constitutionality of Section 2. Because the truth of the matter is, the court could come back and say that the seat is gerrymandered. If they come back and say that the seat is gerrymandered, but we're upholding Section 2, that actually works out, may end up working out better for us in the sense that it would give us the room and the authority to go and pass the map that we originally wanted, the one that was more preferable to us. So it's really not about that. But if they go and they strike down Section 2, then that not only means that you lose black representation in Congress, that means you lose it in the state legislatures all across the country. And I say black, minority, Hispanic, Asian.
Right.
You lose all of that all throughout the country. School boards, metro councils, you name it. You're going to lose judgeships. You're going to lose it all throughout the country. So this ruling on Section 2 really is the end-all, be-all of where we are right now. Because to me, if this goes, I've been telling them, I mean, if they strike down Section 2, it's like Jim Crow 2.0.
Yeah. And then I think, another thing that's also particularly cruel about what is being, like what the discussion is that they brought in Amendment 14, Constitutional Amendment 14 and 15 to question, like, that we shouldn't be considering race, right? And what's really sad about that is that the 14th and the 15th amendments were created after Reconstruction to protect minorities.
Right.
And so then to use an instrument that was there to protect us in a post-Reconstruction era to then be used to take away the power from minority communities is particularly cruel to me.
Yeah, and so I would tell you this: if you go back to 1868, coming out of the Civil War, and like I said, I say this on every chance I get, but just so that people know, we had as many blacks in the legislature in Louisiana then as we do today. And actually, the percentage was higher because you had fewer legislators total number. But the actual number was the same back then as it is now. We've had the governor, we've had a lieutenant governor, we've had the state treasurer, we've had all those things coming out of the Civil War. And so to think that we could go from that number to zero, don't ever think that we can't go from where we are now to zero again. And so that is the real issue. And I'll tell you the other thing that's somewhat offensive. If you look at when this opening session to create this map, when it was done, if people forget, it was on Martin Luther King Day. And so if you go back and you look at the governor's opening speech, and he talks about the challenges and the obstacles that Dr. King had to overcome and how hard it was. But for you, he was and mostly talking to his Republican colleagues, it's just so easy for you. You only have to push a button and vote. And that's not nearly as difficult as the things that Dr. King went through. But then now not even 6 months later, to come back a little longer than that. But you get my point. To come back now and do this is it's somewhat offensive.
Am I correct that at one point there was an Alabama case
Milligan
that seemed to have settled this issue, and with the continuing conservative turn in the court, they decided that this particular case brought about new issues that they feel like were warranted to discuss in federal court?
You know what? I don't know if Milligan, in my opinion, necessarily, as it relates to the overall effect, I don't know if it really brought up any new issues. I think it just gave them a new opportunity. Just think it was a new opportunity, another bite at the apple to rehash some of these same arguments. I mean, they made this same argument in the state maps case and the Nairn case, and the Fifth Circuit in this past July, came out with a very, very powerful decision upholding Section 2 and talking about why Section 2 is necessary. And if the Supreme Court follows any of the reasoning, and they don't have to, they're the Supreme Court.
Right.
But the Fifth Circuit, which is not a liberal circuit, it's a conservative circuit, but if you follow the reasoning and the logic that they place on it, it's all based on Supreme Court precedent. So there's a very strong case, in my opinion, not only to uphold Section 2. For me, I've always been saying we should have never gotten rid of Section 5, which deals with preclearance, especially, in the South, in these states that have had a history of racial discrimination. So for Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, some of these other states, we should still be under Section 5. But Section 5 is gone. But Section 2 is the critical piece, and so we've got to keep that. And I'm not sure. I mean, look, they could go through some legal gymnastics and overturn Milligan in this Calais case. But when I say it's going to be difficult, the reasoning is going to be difficult. To actually make the decision is not. I mean, you just need five of those justices to say this is what we're going to do, and then we'll reverse engineer it and do whatever we need to do to make it work.
What's your sense of where the justices are? I have no confidence at all in the Supreme Court anymore.
You know,
I used to believe that the court was the last bastion of fairness for minorities, people of color, women, the whole 9 yards. But this Roberts Court and what has happened in the federal courts leave me very, very, very insecure with regard to what the federal courts. Every time Judge Digg does something, they go to a different court and get it reversed.
Here's how I would, I guess, state it. I'm going to remain cautiously optimistic. What I guess the only reason, and look, this, you may play this back for me 3 or 4 months from now, and we'll be like, man, you should have never had that, even that much of a hope. But what I will say is this: I would like to believe that Justice Roberts does not want this to be his legacy. He made a good decision, I think, when it was dealing with the Affordable Care Act, and went differently and decided differently than what a lot of people thought he would do. I just feel like under this administration, if he strikes down Section 2 and if he can't convince the court to uphold it, then I think it's going to just be utter chaos. And again, I really believe it would be the end of the civil rights movement as we knew it, and it would be the beginning of,
civil rights movement.
But I think it would get a lot worse before it would ever come back and swing around and get any better. And I don't know if he wants that to be his lasting legacy as the Chief Justice. So that's my only hope.
Even if Roberts sides with the 3 liberals, he would have to bring somebody else along with him.
He's got to bring somebody else along with him, but that's the role of the Chief Justice, to negotiate and to convince somebody else to go along with him. And so, I had this conversation with somebody the other day, and they said, well, I think it's going to be a 6-3 decision to strike Section 2 down. I was like, I don't feel confident enough that either decision would be 6-3. I think whatever it's going to be, I think it's going to be 5-4, one way or the other. And so, I don't know who that 5th person would be on the side of upholding Section 2 or to strike it down. What I do know is this: I know they didn't have 5 votes in July, and so because if they would have, they wouldn't have punted and they wouldn't be re-arguing this issue. And so, I do know that there's some, like anything else, I'm sure there's some negotiation going on and people trying to convince each other of what the real legal precedent and the reasoning should be.
Well, and I think too that the lower courts have been agreeing with us, right? The 5th Circuit here in Louisiana around the fact that
one of the most conservative courts in the nation.
Absolutely, and and even when we went to the Supreme Court in March, the justices said it themselves. They said, because they were arguing that the state didn't have a reasonable. Why did they feel like they had to draw this map? And basically one of the justices said, well, if you don't have these couple of folks on the 5th Circuit, then you don't have the 5th Circuit, and therefore they had a reasonable expectation that they needed to draw a map, right? And I think that even in the state case for Louisiana, where we stand to gain 9 legislative seats, 6 in the House, 3 in the Senate. So again, going back to the point that this is not just about a congressional seat. This is about power across government, right? But then also too in Alabama, both the lower courts ruled that Alabama had to live with the 2 majority-minority seats. So they had to live with Milligan, that they were not going to be able to move forward or stall from having to or to do anything about the Milligan seat. And then they also too made them reapportion Montgomery, because they said Montgomery was racially gerrymandered. So again, like all of that precedent still, even though it ultimately is the Supreme Court's decision, I think that there has been a lot of, there have been some positive signs coming out of the lower courts. And I think that Milligan is a significant hurdle. I just don't know how one year you felt one way and then the next year, like none of that matters. And so I too remain hopeful, right? That, that justice prevails,
They're liars. That's the bottom line on this. I watched all of the Senate meetings with the prospective justices talking about the issue of abortion. And to a person, they said that Roe v. Wade was settled law. We're not going to approach that. Roe v. Wade is settled law. And the moment they had the opportunity to do so, they reversed themselves. And we have what we have now.
Well, I think it's a cautionary tale about what we have to, what communities have to do, though, right? I think that when you think about, I tell this to people all the time, as goes the South, goes the rest of the country. It has never been more true. It has always been true, and it will continue to be true. The question is, will as goes the South be for good things or bad things? And it's typically been for the bad things. I tell folks, think about any terrible policy that you could think of. All of them were seated in the Deep South. And I always give the caveat. I say, well, a terrible policy to me. I'm sure they may not be terrible to other folks, but look at Right to Work. Right to Work was passed in Louisiana. Right. Everybody laughed. They talked about how we weren't the smartest people and we had alligators in our backyard. And it was in Michigan in a year. Yeah. And then here we are 10 years later, and they just barely undid it in Michigan, in a labor-rich state. And so you have to remember that Dobbs out of Mississippi, Calais out of Louisiana, like all of these cases. Plessy versus Ferguson. All of these cases are Southern cases. And so we have to stop pretending like we can ignore the South or to pretend like the South doesn't matter, because the South is determining everyone's quality of life. The South is determining how this country is moving forward, and it is done under the guise of, it's the South, we don't have to pay attention to them, we don't have to worry about them. But the reality is that the South is driving policy in this country, and it cannot be denied. And we're doing it at every level. We're doing it through legislation that then goes wholesale to the rest of the country. We're doing it through through the courts. We're doing, all the way to the Supreme Court. And so folks have to start paying attention. And I think that what's going to be important is for communities to get back out there and protest and have their voices heard and to start talking about this stuff. And, I use the March elections as a bellwether, right? So, we had the 4 constitutional amendments on the March ballot here in Louisiana. Everybody thought it was going to be a low turnout election, extremely low turnout. I think, what was it, 16%, the governor said, and it was, 21%?
Yeah, it's higher, much higher than
21% turnout, and 65% of voters, black, white, and otherwise, voted no on all of the amendments. In fact, they voted 66% on the one to send 14-year-olds to jail, with adults. And so I think at the end of the day, like, it is proof that when educated, when engaged, when moved, right? Like that our communities stand up and we fight for the things that we believe in. And I think that we just have to keep doing that. Because I think that if we just keep turning a blind eye, and I also think too, some of this suffering that's happening in communities across this state. I mean, if you look at the big bill and what it does to Louisiana, I remind people, more than 50% of our state budget comes from the feds. More than 75% of our healthcare budget comes from the feds. So these cuts for Louisiana it means that people are going to die, and not just like, I'm not being dramatic or
hyperbolic.
Yeah, exactly, or like some crazy liberal. Like, no, this is real. Yeah. Like this is what happens in a poor state, which is why they concede policies, terrible policies in the South, and then take them wholesale to the rest of the country in a year, is because we're always going to have federal subsidies to make up for all of the failings of government. I want people to think about our congressional delegation is one of the most powerful delegations in the country right now. We have the speaker, we have the majority whip. let lows on appropriations. I mean, you name it, we've got it, right? And the idea that like we aren't bringing this. What have we brought home? What have we brought home? I just read an article where the speaker, the president is getting ready to remove some things from the speaker's district, take some resources from his district. So it's just like, what, no matter what your politics are, Mary Landrieu brought some bacon home, okay?
Ships are going to be built in New Orleans.
Yeah,
That's what today's paper says.
Yeah, well, but let me say this to you. You said something that I think is certainly true. You said they're lies, but they're persistent. And so I think the lesson for us is we've got to be just as persistent on the other side. Like I've told some of the other elected officials and some of my colleagues. I mean, if you're there and you're not for ending the filibuster, or you're not for expanding the Supreme Court, then, what are we doing? We've got to be just as dogged and as persistent in the things that are important to us as they have shown of the things that are important to them. I mean, Roe v. Wade, we did think it was a well-settled law. I mean, that was decided back in the early 70s.
Yes.
And so, but they waited 50 years to get that overturned.
Yeah.
But they never stopped.
Yeah.
It never was taken out of the conversation.
So then help me understand what does precedent mean if you can come back and undo something once you get your number of judges in the right spot? Everybody talks about precedent, settled law.
Yeah, well.
But precedent doesn't seem to mean a whole lot. We're just waiting until we get our majority, and then we're going to undo precedent.
Well, I think you got a pretty good understanding of what precedent means. You don't need me to explain it. Look, when I took constitutional law in law school, it didn't take me. Look, I consider myself to be a pragmatic person. I mean, we could get into the legal theory and all that other stuff, but the truth is, precedent. The law of the land is what 5 out of 9 says is the law of the land at the end of the day. And so, and with some work, of course, we've got checks and balances. So if Congress wants to go and change a law to make it fit something and sort of skirt around with the Supreme Court has said on one of their rulings to make it comply or whatever, I mean, we can do some of that stuff. But at the end of the day, that's ultimately what it is. And so you're right. They work the courts. And again, but it's not just filling those 9 seats. It's filling those lower court seats at the district court level. It's filling those seats at the appellate court level.
Right.
And so now you've got a system in place. And I don't want to call it like a minor league, because you can take anybody. They don't have to sit on the appellate bench or the district court bench to put them on the Supreme Court or vice versa. But you've got a line of thinking in place that when you want to pull some talent, so to speak, off the bench and put them on the court, you could do that. And so, and they're not just doing that, they're doing it with some of the law school professors as well. And so if you get into that line of thinking and they get into that group think and they get into these think tanks, I mean, that's ultimately what happens. And to their credit, they have been consistent and persistent in doing that on the right. I think the issue for us is, for those who think more progressively, and is that we've got to be just as dogged. We like to play by the rules. They want power. Like they say, we fall in love, they fall in line. And so, we've got to get to that point, and we've got to make sure that we do put like groups like Power Coalition, like community groups like yourself and others, make sure that we put the pressure on our elected officials to hold us all accountable.
Ms. Morrell is going to speak against the very law that she spoke in favor of. So I guess the first practical question I have is, who's going to represent the state of Louisiana in this case?
Nobody.
Nobody
In reality. On paper, it's still them. But when you've got an attorney that's arguing against the client, ultimately nobody represents us. Nobody represents the legislature who passed legally passed SB 8, which became Act 2. Nobody's defending that from the state position. You have the Robinson plaintiffs, and which with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the Public Rights Project, Power Coalition, some of the other plaintiffs that'll be arguing. In essence, arguing the position that's going to defend us. But again, it should not be up to private plaintiffs to defend the state and the will of the legislature. It should be the Attorney General doing that. And so the real answer to that question is nobody. Which is unprecedented to me, but we'll see how that goes.
Can we talk about this from a pragmatic perspective, a little bit closer to home? One of the reasons why the governor selected the map that he selected was to protect Julia Letlow and to punish Garrett Graves.
Right.
What is it about Julia Letlow that she deserves protection?
I don't know if it was more about what is it about. I don't know if it was more about her that deserves protection, as opposed to Garrett Graves deserving punishment for endorsing Wagaspack, who was his friend, against the governor in the gubernatorial election. And so, I mean, he chose to endorse somebody that wasn't the governor. And so he endorsed the man. The man ultimately lost. I guess the governor, you'd have to get into the governor's head on that. But certainly politics being what it is, to the victor goes the spoils. And so he was the victor, and that's the way he wanted to draw the map, and he had the support of others within the legislature to do it, and so that's how it went.
So the governor's being petty, and the attorney general is a hypocrite. Just in plain language. You don't have to say it. I'll say it. The governor is being petty, and the attorney general is a hypocrite. All right, let's move on. What happens next? Because this special session was supposed to be preparing to draw maps in lieu of their belief that this decision was going to go in a certain direction. Now I'm reading that maps are not going to be drawn, that something surrounding calendars is going to be done in this special session. Could you elaborate on exactly what that's about?
Well, let me say this. I will tell you that I don't know much more than what you have read in the paper, because that's what I read as well. We have not had discussions on what a special session would ultimately look like. Now, we all know that it would be for the purpose of doing something with the congressional maps or the election. And so if it is, just for the sake of, if it is to deal with the dates, what they ultimately want to do is push, because remember, we've gone to a closed primary system as it relates to Congress. And so you would have a Democratic primary, you would have the Republican primary, and then you would have the general election. And but with that, you also would have a runoff in the Democratic side or the Republican side if no candidate got more than 50% of the vote. That is set. Qualifying for that is set to take place in January. Well, once that qualifying takes place, that's set. And so regardless of what the court is going to do at that point, that's set, and we've got those two minority seats for another 2 years. So what now they're trying to say is, well, look, if we can give the court more time to decide and we push those dates back and nobody's qualified, then we should be good to go. And the general election doesn't take place until October and November. would be your general election dates anyway. So they're thinking, I'm assuming, that if you would push it back, whether it be May, June, July, that gives them time to do those elections, do the runoffs, and then still do your general election in October and November. You know, they got several issues with that, though. One, on the and so just so that I'm clear, on the case that deals with the state maps, the state went. Now Merle was always against us on that case because the maps that the legislature passed, the Legal Defense Fund, Legislative Black Caucus, Power Coalition, we all think that those were gerrymandered and they're unconstitutional. And in fact, the court has declared them to be unconstitutional. And the Fifth Circuit has declared them to be unconstitutional. But they went, prior to the Fifth Circuit making their decision, they went and they moved for a stay on the remediation phase of that case. And in that phase, the state testified, Sherry Haskey, who's the Commissioner of Elections, testified and said that they need 8 months to implement a map. So my point to that is I am not sure how we push these dates back to May or June, even if the maps do change, and then we're able to implement that. I just don't see how that works. So from my perspective, I think we're stuck with the map that we have right now for the next 2 years, regardless of what happens in that special session. Because based on her testimony, if it's true, then we don't have enough time. But what I also would tell you is this. It also shows that, we get into these sessions and we talk about fiscal responsibility and we talk about trying to save money and all this. We're about to go. We've got elections on the books ready to go. We're about to go and call 3 new special elections that the state is going to have to pick up the tab for, just because on the hope that the Supreme Court rules against us, rather than wait 2 years and go with a different map.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing, too, that is, interesting about all of this is that it's not even just the congressional seats that are going to be, subject to these closed primaries. And so it affects, we've got 2 Public Service Commission seats that are going to be on the fall ballot. We've got 2 Supreme Court seats for the Louisiana Supreme Court that are going to be on that ballot. And again, maybe they just decide that whatever they're deciding is about the congressional seats, but this is about the whole electoral process. Now, Louisiana already has well-documented voter apathy, white and black, across race and age, and part of that is because when we have so many elections, this is already our 5th election. So tomorrow will be the 5th election that we've had to educate, move, and talk to voters about. And
some people don't even know that they can vote.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then think about if whatever comes out of this session, this special session, how are we going to explain this to voters?
And remember, we got constitutional amendments coming up next year, March, April.
Yeah, March or April.
Ballot.
Oh, well, April.
Yeah. It's the April ballot, and they can't be moved.
Right.
And so what I'm saying is those congressional elections were scheduled during that same time period. So even if you move them back, you can't move the constitutional amendments and all that. So it's not like you can scrap the whole election for that date, scrap that whole date, and then make everything on a new date.
There's an April election.
There's already
there's
a
spring
date
election
set.
regardless.
Yeah,
right?
that's set.
Right.
And so that's what I'm saying. And so who picks up the cost of those new elections? We do. And so the taxpayers do. So all while we're going through this Louisiana Doge and all this cost cutting and trying to reduce the Medicaid rolls and all this in the name of supposedly saving money, we're going to go and, I guess that's fiscal responsibility.
What is the advantage of closed primaries versus what we had, which they called jungle primaries? Is there an advantage?
You know what? I'm not. Let me say this. I'm not a proponent of closed primaries. But if you want to say what is the advantage of a closed primary, you would say that people of a certain party get to elect or at least have their most favored candidate run in the election with the possibility of winning. I'm not for closed primaries. I do like the jungle primary system because I think everybody should get a chance to vote on everybody. Yeah. Because what happens in that case, if you're the second place person in the closed primary, then nobody on the other side gets an opportunity to vote for you. But you might be the one favored by the majority of the people. And you got to look at it this way. I try to look at the numbers at least once quarterly, but the last time I looked, we've got over, I'm just using for African Americans, you got over 200,000, I think 225,000 African Americans who are registered as independents now. And so now, what happens is they can choose to vote in one or the other primaries, but they can't vote in both.
Right.
And neither can the other. And you might have, I don't know the numbers on the white independents, but it might be close to 500,000. So, you know, don't quote me on that, but I'll go back and look. But that being said, you've got a significant portion of the population who would, under this current system, would be denied for voting for the other side. Independents get to choose; they can vote in one or the other, but not both. And then if you, like me, and you're a registered Democrat, you can't vote in a Republican primary at all. So although there might be, I don't know who that would be, but just for the sake of argument, assuming that there was a Republican that I wanted to vote for on that side, then I'm denied the opportunity to do that. So, you know, now they would tell you as a Democrat, you shouldn't be able to decide who the Republican candidate is. So if there is an advantage, maybe that's it. But I just think ultimately it denies the opportunity of the people to exercise their will.
Yeah, and then also too, it's again, and who is going to explain this to the people of Louisiana? Because then, going back to the legislature, you know, and we're trying to negotiate and talk to the Secretary of State about how do we educate and try to address some of the voter apathy. And then, you know, there's no money in the budget. And so how is there no money in the budget to educate voters about decisions they're making, right? I mean, what was it, 2 years ago they changed the rules around mail-in ballots? And it was just mass confusion. Nobody understood what the rules were. People didn't know if they were, like, what did it even mean to get in trouble for helping more than one person sign their ballot, or all of these things that also, too, you know, we want to talk about the things we love about Louisiana. Well, one of the things that we love about Louisiana is that your neighbor will help you, right? Like, we are very much a community-based state, right? Like, we depend on our neighbors, we depend on our friends, we depend on our families. And so this new rule around the mail-in ballots and certainly had a disproportionate impact on our seniors and people with disabilities. And it's like no regard for, well, okay, well, who's going to enforce these rules? Who's going to teach people what the rules are? And then for organizations like Power Coalition, then it puts an undue burden that I've got to educate voters on everything, what the rules are for formerly incarcerated people to engage in the vote. What are the rules for mail-in ballots? What are the rules for all of these different processes that they change? And then maybe there's some guidance on their website. Maybe there's some guidance that they put out. But like, again, we're trying to get voters to vote. We want voters to engage, like it's called effective election administration. That's what the Secretary of State's job is. And so how can we have an effective election administration if nobody knows what the rules are, because they're always changing? And then not only are they always changing, but then we're going to have more elections than any other state in the country. It's crazy.
From a practical standpoint, it sounds to me, not just based upon this conversation, but conversations that I've had, that this was a ploy of the governor and his administrative cronies to get rid of Bill Cassidy. That there is anger and resentment coming from the Trump administration toward Bill Cassidy, and that Governor Landry wants to stay in the good graces of the president, and so this was the plan that was put into place to try to unseat Cassidy before he ever made it to a general election. Now, I deal in conspiracies all the time. I ain't got no problem. I ain't running for office. I can deal with whatever there is. But I'm asking, is there anything to the idea that the entire state is being maneuvered because vendettas are being paid for certain people, against certain people, for the President of the United States?
You know, in that case, as specifically as it relates to Cassidy, I don't know if I buy that theory, because I think inherent in that is you're making the assumption, or whoever's got that theory is making the assumption that Cassidy has crossover appeal and is going to get a lot of black support, African American support. I don't know that to be the case. I've heard a lot of African Americans, especially since Cassidy voted to go with Kennedy as Secretary of Health, that they wouldn't vote for him at all. So I don't know if that premise necessarily holds up, but I think the bigger thing is this for me, and there might be some truth to that. I really don't know. What I would say is I think they have made a calculation that if, and this is one of the things I do think that's a disadvantage to the closed primary system, is that on occasion you're going to get the extremes of both parties out there, and so you might not get somebody that's more moderate. And hey, look, maybe I say that might be a con. Somebody might say that's a pro. It just depends on where you're on the political spectrum. But I think they've made a calculation to say that if we take our most extreme candidate and put it against the Democrats' most extreme candidate, that we'll win out. And so that's what I think it is meant to do that. And I also think it's meant to take, and this is part of my theory, and I think some other people may share it. I think this is also meant to take white people who have traditionally been Democrats and move them over to the Republican side. Yeah, because they want to be able to vote for their candidate. Right. And if, look, in Louisiana, the Democratic Party is majority black now. The numbers show that. So that if a white Dem is going to get fewer chances to actually be electable, then most of those people are going to become Republicans. And if you get them over to your side, then you get the numbers, and maybe they start to vote with you, which I think there are a lot of people that's on the voter rolls that have been Dems, old Dixiecrats, that still are registered as Dems. This is the move now to really force them to go over to the Republican side, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because now when you're looking at your numbers, you may get a more accurate depiction of what the voter base really looks like.
With regard to the state budget or the state revenue, the status of state revenues, last number I heard is that the state is $155 million in the hole. Is that correct?
Let me say
this coming fiscal year.
I don't sit on appropriations, so let me be very clear. Those who sit there are a little bit more than me. I can tell you that the number I've heard is at least that, and could be up to 2 times that amount.
So as much as $300 million.
Depending on how things go, yeah. Depending what happens with these, because you have to remember, a lot of what we were proposing in the budget was contingent upon those constitutional amendments passing. And part of my argument back then was, why would we go and pass a statute that locks us in before we know what's going to happen with the constitutional amendments? Shouldn't we do that first and then come back and pass it, especially since you got the votes to pass the statute anyway? Right. But they didn't want to do that, so they ended up passing some of these laws without the amendments passing, and now they've taken these amendments and broken them down in pieces. They basically giving you the same stuff warmed over in April, and they're now going to try to repackage it and present it in a way as if it wasn't what you just voted down in March. So that's part of Ashley's job, though, to go and re-educate people and let them know that even though this looks a little different, this is ultimately the same thing that you voted down and either voted down again. And so if that doesn't, if those amendments don't pass, then some of the triggers that they had for our benefit is, we're going to really have to go back and try to figure it out.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, and I'm over my time, but just give me a couple of minutes. Louisiana has the most regressive tax system in the nation, my opinion. Sales taxes for everything, and sales taxes are patently unfair toward poor people. You're $155 to $310 million in the hole in this coming fiscal year. You don't want to do anything about ITEP. You don't want to do anything where you ask corporations to pay their fair share of taxes in this state. Exactly where is this money supposed to come from? You've already made mention of the fact that we receive a sizable portion of our dollars from the federal government, which we now know has been cut severely. So where is the revenue supposed to come from to cover these expenses?
Well, look, you're not gonna get it through austerity. So you can cut as much as you want to cut. You're not gonna be able to cut that much. Here's what I will tell you. And in fact, I looked at this morning. Louisiana is one of the few states. I say few states, but we consistently get more money from the federal government than what we send to D.C. And so, and this is sort of an oversimplification, but I've never really understood the premise of us wanting to cut our Medicaid rolls and all this other stuff. And I understand they're talking about, well, we want to reduce fraud. And look, nobody wants waste, fraud, and abuse. Let's be clear about that. But at the same time, you really are being subsidized by California, New York, Florida, Texas, and some of these others. So it's not just blue states, but mostly blue states that you're being subsidized by. So why would you not, as much as they talk about California and everything that's wrong, why would you not want to take money from California that goes to D.C. and bring it back to Louisiana? If you're cutting people from the rolls, that's basically what you're doing. They're saying, okay, keep your money. We don't want it. You know, and so I never can understand the motivation behind that unless the motivation is something else. And I think too often in Louisiana, our motivation, let me say this, those in power, the motivation has been to be punitive. I mean, and to me, that's really all it's about. It's not whether it makes fiscal sense, economic sense. It's about can I bring pain upon you and make you bear the brunt of that pain in such a way to make you submissive to our will. And I think that's traditionally been the case. And so we've got to get out of that mindset if we really want to change it. So where does the money come from? Look, I mean, they may end up raising some taxes. And I will say this. I was one, even under Governor Edwards, when we did the penny, or the half penny. But anyway, what we did on that, I voted against that twice before I voted for it. Now, we do have exceptions for food, drugs, and utilities, which makes it a little bit less regressive than a pure sales tax. But I agree with everything you said. But I assume at the end of the day, they're going to have to do that again. And of course, you know, they are caught up in this whole thing that they ran on no tax increases. So they found themselves in these legal fictions and these hurdles of actually passing an increase, but then technically not defining it as an increase. So I'm sure they'll come up with some logic again.
Well, and I think, too, that people also have to get real about our state and where we are. I mean, you know, everybody, we used to tease about winning the race to the bottom with Mississippi. We have won. We have won the race. I mean, on every quality of life indicator you can think of, you know, the people of Louisiana we are failing. We are not thriving. We're not, you know, like we're not living as long. We, you know, even though we, you know, I praise our legislature for trying to address some of the maternal mortality rates for, you know, Black and other women of color in this state. Like we are not, you know, we're not winning. We're not winning. We're not winning in the ways we should. We're winning in all the wrong ways. And I think that, you know, I agree with you. Where is the money going to come from? But as a citizen, all I see is Hyundai plant gets, you know, $1 billion rebate, you know, or tax break. You know, Meta facility that's, you know, the size of 7 Superdomes is coming here, and Louisiana taxpayers, you can pay for the 3 nuclear energy plants that it's going to take to run this. You know, like all these things. And what I remind people all the time though is that they can only do this if we stand by. And so when we hear about a special session that's supposed to be coming up at the end of October, be there, right? When you hear about a public service commission meeting, be there, because they've gotten so, some elected officials, present company excluded, right? Like they've gotten so comfortable with the amount of power and the amount of diffuse nature of us understanding how much power that is, that they feel like they can do whatever they want. And in some cases, I really do think that it's just sheer ignorance of the real lived experience of most people in this state. And I think that that's where we have to get back to having our voices heard, building a record so that we can make sure that if we do have a case for where we have literally been taken advantage of or not gotten what we deserved as prescribed by federal law, then we need to go be able to use all the tools in the toolbox to be able to do that. But the first thing is showing up. And I mean, that's why at Power Coalition, if it's happening, you can go to our website and find out about it. You need a ride to the polls, you can go to our website and find out about it. You need a ride to the Capitol, you go to our website and find out about it. And so powercoalition.org, we're out here to support people actually engaging in government at every level, and also too voting in every election. There's a lot, and they have a lot of elections on purpose because they want you to be exhausted. They want you to be frustrated. But at the end of the day, every election matters, and if we've ever been more clear of that, we're clear of that now. And I tell people, remember during COVID, your elected officials were deciding whether you were safe at your job, whether your kids were safe at school. What they were determining your quality of life in a way that we hadn't really felt and seen in a long time. And I think that folks just need to always go back and remember COVID, and now all the decisions and things that have happened since then. And it requires our voice. It requires our vote. And the voters of Louisiana are a powerful group. 1 in 3 voters in the state of Louisiana is African American. And so we have the power to change the things that we want to change. We have to show up, though, and we have to consistently show up, because then, too, you get politicians and get candidates that then get elected who can believe in the fact that the base is going to show up and be able to support them and cover them to be able to lead and do the things that we need to do. And, and I, sometimes, happen to sit in a barbershop or two around the state, and everybody wants to tell me why they love Trump and he's a thug and he's a gangster. And I said, well, but in order to be a gangster, you got to have a whole network that beyond a shadow of a doubt is going to support you and do what you say. And I was like, and we need to be able to give that back to, elected leaders that are going to do the work of the people in the same way that business and billionaires have stood behind and held the power for their side. And I just think that we have abdicated our power, and it's time to stand up in it and to own it. And you got to be involved, and you got to watch it. And it's about our children. I mean, think about it. Right now, I have less rights than my parents had, much less if I go back further. But I have less rights.
Yes.
I don't have to go back that much further, which is even more unfortunate. But I was like, I have less rights. And what direction do we think this is going to continue to go in? And I was like, the fears I had for my children when I was even considering having kids, I could have never imagined this. I never imagined that we would be going in this direction. And so, again, the only way we stop this is if we stand up and we fight, we get involved, have our voices heard in this process, stand behind our elected officials that are willing to fight for us. You want a thug and a gangster? Well, then you got to have cover to be to be a thug and a gangster, and that's what we're seeing play out at the national level. And again, and I think that, to me, I don't necessarily know if I want a thug or a gangster, but I want somebody whose word means something. Sure. And I want somebody that's going to stand up and not, I don't need to be in love. I need for you to believe in the things that I believe in. And I think so much of the fight and so much of my work has been doing things that people think are impossible. And I was like, how much easier would the work be if I didn't have to convince people that we could have a second majority minority district in the state of Louisiana because of the Black and brown population in the state? How much easier would it have been if if Vote didn't have to convince folks that formerly incarcerated people shouldn't be convicted by non-unanimous juries? Like all of these things. Reenfranchising formerly incarcerated voters. I mean, all these things. Were people thought they were impossible, and they all happened. We've expanded voting rights for the last 5 years. we've done things that nobody thought could be done in a deep South state. And there have been courageous leaders at the legislature that have stood by us and protected and fought with us to get these things done. But again, it takes the threat of the people, and none of it can be done unless they know that there is the threat of the people to come and say, well, maybe we don't want you back next time. Maybe we want some different kind of leadership because it hurts too much. And I think that if people don't think it hurts too much, very soon here, because let's remember the big ugly bill it's not going to take into effect until after midterms.
Right.
And so,
by plan.
Yeah, exactly, by plan. And so I think that people just have to realize what we're up against. And also, too, they've been believing for 50 years plus. And you think about, people love to tell me what can't be done. I was like, they undid the Department of Education.
Yes.
Something I never thought could be done in my lifetime. It's done.
Yes.
And so I think that we just have to have just as much of a radical imagination, and show up and fight for the things in the country that we want to live in, and in particular, fight for the kind of Louisiana we want to live in. Those constitutional amendments that they're bringing back in April, like I said about the last set of amendments, I said this is about destroying everything that's left that you love about this state. Because here's what's really fun. We are the poorest people, but we also poll as the happiest people, which is the craziest thing that I ever heard of. But I understand it because I'm Southern. I get it, right? But I also feel like that completely goes away once you have made it untenable for anybody to continue to live here.
Yeah.
And so people got to get involved, and they have to have their voices heard, and they got to stand up.
What do we do in 2 weeks when this special session? John Q. Public, me. What does Fred do to help you when this special session starts?
Well, are we talking you, John Q. Public, or are we talking you in the pulpit and everything else? So that
John Q. Public.
All right.
John Q. Public.
All right. No, look. Here's the biggest thing I always tell everybody. You can be engaged. Certainly, we want you to show up at the Capitol. So let me say that first and foremost. If you can afford to, and if you got the time and the ability and capabilities, we want you to be at the Capitol. It's the people's house. We say it all the time. We need the people to show up. That's one. If you can't do that, though, what I always say about a lot of these guys, they don't want accountability, and they want to be able to go home and be friends with people that they voted directly against their interests. But the problem is the people don't know any different. But if you've got a cell phone, if you've got access to the internet, all our meetings are live streamed. Chamber is live streamed. It's archived. You can find all of it. And so if you've got access to the internet, you can see exactly what they've done. You can see exactly how they voted. So the thing for me is we've got to expose some of these people for who they are so that they can't go. Look, if you live in Baton Rouge, the truth of it is, I tell people all the time, when you live in Baton Rouge, it's always good to be from Baton Rouge when you're in session because you get to go home, you get to sleep in your bed every night and everything else. I said, but when you're out of session, it's probably the worst to be from Baton Rouge because Baton Rouge is a political city and politics never sleeps. And so it's always going on, so you can't hide. So there is a level of transparency that automatically comes from being in Baton Rouge. But if you're in Shreveport or Monroe or any of them, you get now when you're here, you have to sleep in a hotel room or apartment, so it's always worse when you're here. But then when you go home, you get to go home. Nobody's none the wiser. They don't know, and you can go and say I did this and I did that, or when some money comes your way, you may have voted against the bill that sent money to your parish, but when they do the ribbon cutting, you're right there, smiling and everything as if you played a big role in it, and nobody knows any differently.
Right.
And so we've got to expose that, though, so that their constituents know exactly what they're doing when they're here in Baton Rouge. So you can go to legis.la.gov. You can go there. You can, if you're on the House side, you can go to house.louisiana.gov. And you can see those meetings, or senate.louisiana.gov, excuse me, and go to either live video stream, or you can go to the archives. If you know the date or the committee meeting, you can see all that. So what can they do? I think the best thing I would tell you is get engaged, get involved, educate yourself on what's going on. And we've got a lot of organizations like Power Coalition that puts out stuff, Cable, PAR, some of the other organizations. I don't think they do as good of a job as what Ashley does. But I would tell you, read as much information as you can on some of these issues. And then when you show up, you know what questions to ask.
Yeah, and then, we'll be doing a series of trainings. So even though the call for this special session has shifted from a trigger map to now focusing on moving the dates, the question is still the same, right? Like, you're still moving the dates in the hopes that I have less rights, right? And I think that people need to take advantage of this opportunity to have their voices heard, because I really do think, if you think about the last 10 months in this country, like, we haven't seen unbelievable protest about the things that have been happening, and I think that, like, folks, they need to remember that one of the most American things is to protest. That we need to be seen, be heard, and so join. We don't, the call is floating right now, so it's potentially on the October 23rd. But once we have a real date, you can go to our website and sign up to get text messages about when the session will happen. There's also going to be some trainings around how to testify, and then also some briefings on, like, what is happening. I mean, and so a lot of what we've shared here today, we'll add this link to our website so that folks can listen if they want to understand.
And my executive director will kill me if I don't say, look, we just updated our website. It's lablackcaucus.org. And so you can go to that. We just updated it and reintroduced it, I guess, about a month or so ago.
Okay.
Very nice.
You can look at it. I think they did a wonderful job with it. And so you can go there as well to get you some of your information.
And so I'm going to make a clear ask, because my organizers would get on me if I didn't if I didn't do what I tell them to do all the time. One, if you can show up on the first day of the redistricting special session, show up. Have your voice heard. Call your legislator out and ask them to come out of committee and talk to you. Find them on the floor of the House or the Senate side. Ask them to come to the back of the room to speak to you. Second, also call your legislator on that first 2 days of session. It's so important. Flood the switchboard. Call your legislators, because it matters to them, right? Like, that their constituents are calling them. And if you have a question about what's the number for your constituent, for your representative or senator, you can go to our website and find that out. You can also go to the Secretary of State's website. It's on the house.louisiana.gov or senate.louisiana.gov. You can go in. You can actually type in your address. If you go to legis.la.gov, you can find all your representatives. And we have a simpler link on powercoalition.org, but it's going to take you to that site. It is ultimately going to you click the link, it takes you right there, and you can put your address in and figure out who represents you. And then but again, I always give the official sites as well, so I appreciate that, Chairman Jordan. So that folks can feel like I'm, whatever you want to do.
Let's be clear. I'd rather you go to the Power Coalition's website and get there. But there are multiple. The point is there's multiple ways.
Yeah.
Multiple ways
for
you to get
calls, right? But make those calls, and I think that it's like that's something you could take your lunch break and make a quick call and just say, I wanted to call and say that it matters to me that we have fair maps and that we have representation in this state that is representative of the people that live here. And then I think the other thing to do is also think about testifying. And you don't have to show up in person. If you can't show up in person, you can submit your testimony before committee online. I think an hour before.
Yeah, you can submit online, and if you come, just understand. And I know you guys do a great job talking about the green cards or the red cards. Most people who are coming to testify won't necessarily fill out white cards, because those are just like for information only. Yeah. But if you're for a bill, you can fill out the green one. If you're opposed to it, you fill out the red card. Put your name, your information. Yeah. And even if you don't want to, we prefer you testify. But if you don't want to testify, you can still fill out that card and say you do not wish to speak. Yeah, I'm in opposition, or I'm supported, but I do not wish to speak on it. And they have to read those in the record as well.
Yeah, and I think I think people underestimate the power of a record, right? So when you fill out one of those cards, it's an affidavit pretty much, and it's your name and your address. And so when sometimes in court it's come up that we don't even know if all these people were from Louisiana. I was like, well, sweetie, I I signed my affidavit with my name and address here in the state of Louisiana, registered voter, citizen of this state. And so I think it's like those things that actually matter, is that no matter what people say for the TVs, that, you know, the record is clear. And I think that that's what we want to see from this session. I think that, again, I think the thought is that people don't care. And I think I'm very clear that I care, and Chairman Jordan and his colleagues care, and we're going to fight. And I think that, you know, everybody has to see this as a fight, because that's exactly what it is. And so powercoalition.org will have the link for you to find your representative or your senator. We'll also probably do an easier listing of their phone numbers, so you can just find them, like I said, multiple ways for you to find whatever you need. And then also 2 easy ways for you to just kind of figure out the things that we're asking people to do, which is to, you know, show up those first 2 days, definitely also make that call. You know, and then also, you know, to tell a friend, tell a neighbor, because we have to start getting the word out about how critical this is. And also, Power Coalition and the Black Caucus will be hosting a listening party for the Supreme Court oral arguments. And so if you want to tune in on the 15th, we're sending out a graphic. You can listen. You can listen into the Supreme Court, and hopefully we'll have some special guests that can give you some pre-guidance on what you'll be hearing, and then be able to listen to the Supreme Court proceeding, and you know, and it's just to be in solidarity and to be with each other. But I do think that that's a powerful opportunity to listen. You know, I tease folks that say we listen to these podcasts, and so like let's listen to the Supreme Court, so that we understand where we think this country might be going, and what we may need to do. And so, you know, just ready to fight always.
Thank y'all for coming.
Thank you for
My pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Edmond Jordan, for coming from the Louisiana Legislative Black Caucus. Thank you, Mrs. Ashley Shelton, for coming from the Power Coalition. Thank you all for viewing. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back again next time.